In the previous videos, I showed how to create a confidence interval when the population standard deviation was known. However, in many real-life situations, we don't actually know what the population standard deviation is with any certainty. When that happens, we're going to use a t-distribution instead of a z-distribution. And that's what this section is about. A t-distribution is a family of curves, not just one normal curve. These curves are similar to the normal distribution, but they do have thicker tails. One thing they have in common with the normal distribution is the mean, median, and mode are all in the center at 0. Total area under the curve is still 1. And the standard deviation of the t-distribution will vary with the degrees of freedom, but it's always greater than 1. The degrees of freedom, sometimes abbreviated DF, is the number of free choices left after a sample statistic such as X bar has been calculated. The degrees of freedom will be 1 less than the sample size itself. So one analogy that's made often to explain degrees of freedom and why it has this formula is if you imagine a room with a certain number of chairs, let's say n chairs, and n people are going to walk in and sit down. Everybody has a choice about where they sit except for the last person to enter the room. And so that's why the degrees of freedom has a formula of n minus 1. As the degrees of freedom increase, the t-distribution will actually tend to look more like the normal distribution. At around a degree of freedom of 30, the distribution is approximately the same as the normal distribution. If the degrees of freedom is allowed to go all the way to infinity, then our t-distribution is the normal distribution. Let's try number 1, which says find the critical value Tc for a 95% confidence level if the sample size is 15. So unlike Z critical values, when it comes to T critical values, we actually have to take into account the sample size. That's what makes this just one level a little bit more complicated than the ZC approach. So let's find, first of all, the degrees of freedom. That'll get us started. N is 15. Therefore, the degrees of freedom, having the formula n minus 1, will be 14. Now we have to use that, 14, when we go to the table. So let's go to the T table now. T table's on a different page than the Z table. Here it is. You have to look up your degrees of freedom on the first column. Our degrees of freedom for our problem was 14. And then we have to select from one of these choices. Now, which one you use depends on the situation. Here, we're looking for a confidence level. So we want to use this type. And the confidence level was 95%. So we'll start with that, 95% confidence. We want to trace it down until we intersect it with the row 14. 2.145 is going to be our critical value, TC.